Welcome everyone to my video raising awareness about the mental health condition complex trauma, also known as complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Its abbreviated term is CPTSD. I'll be making this video just to raise awareness about the condition, but I'm also doing it in conjunction with a sponsored read I will be doing. I'll be reading the BFG back to back with the Twits on a live stream to raise money for my friend who has complex trauma, for them to get the therapy that they need. So tune in on May the 30th. There's going to be a link below in the commenty bit of this YouTube link of where you can watch my live stream. And if you are in a position where you feel like you want to donate, the GoFundMe page will be down there as well. So without further ado, let's crack on. And what I think we will do is change location. Boom. So what is complex trauma? I hear you all asking. So a lot of us are at least vaguely familiar with the condition PTSD, also known as post-traumatic stress disorder. So complex trauma is the complex version of that, quite literally. So before I explain what complex PTSD is, it's going to be a lot easier for me to explain and you to understand if I explain what PTSD is first. So let's get cracking on that. In fact, as well, let's change location. Oh yeah. So PTSD is an umbrella term for when someone suffered something traumatic and the symptoms do not fade away naturally as you would hope they would after around 3 or 4 months. PTSD is a singular traumatic event happening or a series of identifiable traumatic events happening which have an observable cause which correlate with an observable effect, which sounds complicated, but I'm about to give you an example to make it clearer. So I'm going to use the typical example which most people are familiar with, which is a war veteran who has witnessed his comrade come under fire in a vehicle and the experience is lessened with a trauma. So from that point forward, the person with PTSD, if they were, for example, to hear an engine start which reminds them of the engine which they heard at this traumatic event, or if they were to smell a fuel or a type of smoke which reminds them of the event, or if they were to see a similar vehicle or a similar person or a similar landscape that reminds them of that original event, the brain would receive the same stimulus that they had received at that root traumatic incident. This is known as a trigger. The trigger is a response into the physical and emotional experience that the person would have gone through at the time of the firefight, so essentially re-experiencing that event. So this could present as panic attack symptoms, feelings of terror, feelings of deep dread and anxiety, could be guilt or shame or feeling very unsafe, and vividly remembering the event as they saw it at the time, and this would be known as a flashback. I'll tell you what, let's change location. Bam! So, in summary of PTSD, and I'm speaking incredibly broadly here as I'm just trying to cram as much as I can into a very small little video. Number one, it is a singular event or a series of singular traumatic events in an easily identifiable timeline. Number two, these events can be recalled by the person as memories, and that's really key, a real key difference between PTSD and CPTSD, as I'll get onto in a moment. Number three, the trigger would typically be something that they heard, smelt, saw, or a situation they're in that reminded them of that root event they can remember, and that will trigger the flashback. Number four, the flashback would typically present as a very vivid memory of the event. Number five, the flashback would manifest in the body as a fight or flight response and be linked to, maybe linked to the emotional feelings they had at the time. And that essentially is my PTSD in a nutshell. Okay, so now we've done PTSD, let's talk about CPTSD, complex trauma. Let's change location. Booyah. So CPTSD tends to be accumulated over a longer period of time with multiple traumatic events rather than a singular one. Most commonly with CPTSD, this will come in the form of abuse, whether that be emotional abuse, neglect, sexual abuse or physical abuse. There are other types of abuse as well, of course. most commonly with CPTSD as well. This will happen in the earlier stages of someone's life, whether it's be as young as being an infant or childhood, all the way up to late adolescence, whilst the brain is still developing. So with complex trauma, people don't necessarily remember the traumatic events, and this could be that for several reasons. One, that maybe they were so young that they can't remember, particularly if you're an infant or a child. It may be that they don't remember because the events were relatively small. For example, if someone's kind of consistently being traumatized as a child, they're not going to remember every single small little event. Other reasons people might not remember, maybe if they're in an altered state of mind, whether that's spending long periods of their life intoxicated, or if they're in a manipulative relationship. And this is why it's complex, because there are multiple hard to identify triggers, and the responses to these triggers are not attached to a specific memory as they would be with PTSD. So the person will experience the adrenal responses of being under threat, which is fight, flight or freeze. Also with the different emotions, could be feeling deeply unsafe, could be feeling rage, shame or guilt, but there will be no memory attached to these responses, so they're unable to identify where and why these feelings are arising. The symptoms will arise without warning and without an easily identifiable explanation. And let's change location. Shazam! So other symptoms of CPTSD could be avoidance of emotion, feeling worse about yourself and worse about the world. Also can present in something known as hyperarousal. So hyperarousal is where a person will experience, without any warning, high levels of rage, irritability, anxiety, as if they're under threat. It's common for people with complex trauma to grow up thinking that there's something wrong with them, or they grow up actually fearing emotions because their extreme emotional responses to things known as emotional dysregulation are affecting their lives in such a negative way. So complex trauma can make the person who has it feel vulnerable, angry, sad and unsafe in everyday relationships, which can make making friends and keeping friends very difficult. It can also make holding down a day job an incredibly challenging task. So, to conclude my, in a nutshell, explanation of CPTSD, let's change location. Whoa. Okay, so my summary of complex trauma. Number one is it is commonly a series of multiple traumatic events. Number two, complex trauma is commonly caused, but not always, by traumas experienced in the early years of the brain developing, whether that be as an infant, during childhood or adolescence. Number three, these experiences are not recalled as memories but as feelings. Number four, the trigger could be something that someone saw, heard, smelled, or could just be the context that they're in. Number five, the flashback is only the emotional and physical adrenal responses. And finally, number six, other symptoms for CPTSD include frequent and vivid nightmares, disassociation, high anxiety, avoidance of emotions, hyperarousal, feelings of rage or unsafety, feelings of guilt, and difficulties with trust. So my advice for anyone who is supporting someone who has complex trauma, whether it's a friend or a family member or any other context, is just please be empathic. You might not be able to understand or relate to the person's emotional responses, but their emotional responses are totally valid and totally real. So please just be compassionate and be kind and be patient. You can't expect someone who has been triggered by something and goes into a extreme emotional response to snap out of it just by telling them that they aren't under threat or trying to rationalise the situation. It doesn't necessarily work like that, but being reassuring to them is helpful. And if the person's in a position where they feel able to, professional support is out there. And if it is yourself who has complex trauma, I'll just say do practice self-kindness and self-compassion, and don't blame yourself if you're commonly go into hyper-arousal and you can be irritable or go into fits of rage. You are not a bad person. Bad things have happened to you which lead to these responses. So it's really important to keep that in context. Okay, so we're getting to the end of our video here. Thank you very much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And one last time, let's change location. Oh yeah, cool. Well, thank you guys very much for watching my video about complex trauma. Please share the video to raise awareness of it. Once again, on May the 30th, I will be reading the BFG and the Twits, written by Roald Dahl. I'll be reading them both back to back on a live stream. The link to the live stream will be somewhere in the commentary section of the YouTube link below. So please tune in and watch it and enjoy. Also below will be a link to the GoFundMe page. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm doing this to raise funds for my friend who has complex trauma, and I'm trying to raise the appropriate funds for them to get the appropriate therapy. So if you are in a position where you would like to donate, please do, links below. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Please share it. Take care guys, and big up.